How does the Chatreey N150 Mini PC perform? Let's find out together through this review. From the interface, it is clear that this is not an upgraded version of the N150. It has reduced to fully functional Type-C ports, leaving it with only the display interfaces. The surface continues to use the same matte finish as the T9H, offering a comfortable and premium feel. The bottom features an air intake vent, while the sides have two air outlets. Designed with a single fan and dual heat dissipation vents, its volume is smaller than the T9H, and its weight is also lighter than the T9H. The all-black design may not be eye-catching, but appears well with monitors and keyboards. After opening the case of the T10 Mini PC, it can be seen that it uses DDR4 to 100 MT per second memory and an M2SATA2 to Aida SSD. It also supports NVMe SSDs. Since I need to test the bandwidth of this SSD slot next, I replace the SSD with a higher speed PCIe 4.0X for SSD. After removing the screws from the motherboard, you can see its fan and heatsink. The heatsink fins are not densely packed, and the fan does not appear to be a high-speed one. Its advantage is lower noise, but this design does not offer high cooling efficiency. Nevertheless, the dual-sided cooling design of the heatsink is very reasonable and clever. At the same time, it seals off the two hot air channels to prevent hot air from recirculating. This makes its cooling efficiency sufficient for this low-power mini PC. On the side of the motherboard, we can see the Wi-Fi chip soldered onto it, which makes upgrading the Wi-Fi impossible. The settings available for modification in the BIOS remain limited. However, we can adjust the computer's virtualization support, TDP, and TPM options under the advanced menu. The default TDP setting is 18 watts. Based on my testing, the maximum power can be set to 22 watts. Setting it higher will not take effect, likely due to restrictions imposed by the computer's EC. It is important to note that the power settings have two levels. The value must be set to match in both the upper and lower menus for it to take effect. In the chipset menu, we can even configure the supported memory frequency. But since the memory slot is DDR4, there is no practical need to modify it. In the boot menu, we can configure options such as power on after EC recovery, scheduled startup, network wake-up, and the system boot order. The T10 has a standby power consumption of approximately 3 to 4 watts when idle, with a CPU temperature around 38 degrees Celsius. With screen recording software currently running, its power consumption has slightly increased to about 8 watts, and the CPU temperature has risen to roughly 45 degrees Celsius. It is equipped with an Intel Twin Lake N150 CPU, featuring a multi-core turbo frequency of 2.9 GHz and a single-core turbo frequency of 3.6 GHz, with 4 cores and 4 threads. Compared to the N100, it provides a slight improvement. It supports the PCIe 3.0 bus, and concurrently, the BIOS information indicates that this BIOS accommodates a TDP of 18 watt. It utilizes a single DDR4 memory module operating at a speed of 30 to 100 MT per second. The computer utilized for testing is equipped with 16 GB of memory. There is only one memory slot, and the memory information shows that its manufacturer is GAL. Using Micron chips, produced in 2025, it is very known. The graphics card is an Intel Twin Lake integrated GPU. In the CPU-Z benchmark, its multi-core score is 1286.6, and its single-core score is 375.0. To avoid interference with the test data from running other software, the test was conducted without screen recording software enabled. After starting the CPU stress test, the CPU frequency increased to 2.9 GHz and remained stable. At this point, its multi-core turbo boost has reached its limit, and the CPU performance has been pushed to its maximum potential. However, the power consumption is still only 15 watts, leaving some margin before reaching the 18 watt limit. This is a positive sign, indicating that the CPU can still allocate additional power to the GPU when needed. After starting the Aida 60 for stress test, the CPU frequency quickly rose to 2.9 GHz, while the CPU power increased to around 17 watts. The CPU temperature also climbed to approximately 65 degrees. 90 minutes later, after an hour and a half of stress testing, the CPU's final temperature stabilized at 70 degrees. The power consumption and CPU frequency remained the same as at the beginning, without any throttling over time. Even during prolonged operation, the Chatreey T10 Mini PC is able to maintain excellent performance. During noise testing, even though I was in a relatively quiet environment, external noises such as street traffic and footsteps from upstairs still significantly affected the data. In contrast, the noise from the computer itself was the most stable and quiet. When the computer was in standby mode, the measured noise levels ranged between 15 and 25 decibels. When running a simulated high-load noise test while opening Warcraft for gaming, the measured noise levels showed almost no change and were even slightly better. This made the test somewhat awkward, as it can only be said that the Mini PC's noise is far lower than the ambient noise. In the Cinebench R23 test, the Chatreey T10 achieved a single-core score of 956 and a multi-core score of 2,921. Even at a power consumption of 15 watt, its performance reached 77% of an 11th generation i7. The Chatreey T10 Mini PC comes with an M.2 SATA 280 SSD as its built-in storage. The read speed is approximately 537 MB per second, and write speed is approximately 484 MB per second. To test the bandwidth of the computer's SSD slot, I replaced the drive with a Crucial P3 Plus PCIe 4.0 times for SSD. We can now see that its M.2 slot supports PCIe 3.0 times 2 lanes. It is worth noting that previously, it only supported PCIe 3.0 times 1 lanes. After communicating with Chatreey, they updated the BIOS and expanded it to PCIe 3.0 times 2. This makes it possible to install entry-level PCIe 3.0 times for SSD on this computer. However, when installing PCIe 4.0 times for SSDs, the speed of the SSD will be limited by the interface speed. Therefore, high-speed PCIe 3.0 times for SSDs or PCIe 4.0 SSDs are not recommended. In the end, we measured the read and write speeds of the hard drive interface to be approximately 1,700 MB per second. In the 3D Mark Time Spy test, its FPS was only 2 to 3 frames. This is enough to prove that the Chatreey T10 Mini PC is not a device suitable for gaming. Nevertheless, it still managed to outperform most of its competitors that are also equipped with the N150. I'm curious about what it would be like to use the Chatreey T10 Mini PC for gaming tests. Let's push this computer to its limits. In the end, it scored 476 points in the 3D Mark Time Spy test. During testing, the CPU frequency peaked at 3.6 GHz. Enabling the graphics card had minimal impact on the CPU's performance. Similarly, in the tests of Night Raid and Steel Nomad Lite, the Chatreey T10 Mini PC also far exceeds the average performance. It is well known that the N150 is not suitable for gaming. However, to present its performance more intuitively, I arranged the following test. To ensure greater accuracy, I decided not to use screen recording software and instead opted for recording the screen with a phone. This might result in slightly blurry visuals, but at least the test data will be accurate. During ACS Go match, I got completely shredded by other players and could barely manage to target a few idle, offline opponents. The FPS counter in the bottom right corner showed only 30, which is disastrous for a shooting game. I couldn't aim accurately and had no choice but to reluctantly switch to a shotgun I rarely use. I played for a full half hour just to get this 4-kill streak. And even then, 2 of them were AFK players. The experience, let's just say I managed to successfully launch the game, and that's about it. The test was conducted at a resolution of 1080p. Moreover, the in-game graphics settings were already adjusted to the lowest level. Yet even so, the N150 still couldn't run it smoothly. We came to the World of Warcraft Classic servers to test it out. Wrath of the Lich King is a game from around 2010, so its hardware requirements are relatively low. I didn't dare test the retail version of World of Warcraft because the various effects and more complex environments in the retail version would be far more demanding. I'm certain this computer wouldn't be able to handle it. When I first entered the game, it automatically detected the hardware and set the settings to the lowest configuration, with the resolution set to 760p. To make the test fairer, I adjusted it back to 1080p. When entering the dungeon, gathering, and applying buffs, the game's FPS consistently stays at 60, which is the highest frame rate supported by this game. When the mount gathers the monsters together and starts using AoE, the frame rate begins to fluctuate, but it doesn't drop significantly. This is likely thanks to the in-game lowest graphics settings. Oh, this damn Scarlet Monastery weapon. Let's take a look at the performance of League of Legends. When I started running it, I felt it was fairly smooth. So I didn't deliberately lower the graphics settings and kept them at the default. The results were surprising during the LOL test. When there weren't many units on screen, the frame rate actually exceeded 80. In smaller scale team battles, the FPS generally remains stable at over 60. Although the frame rate has dropped, this level is still acceptable. Even in the final stages, with all the units and players gathered on the same screen, the frame rate remains above 50. It's hard to believe, but the N150 seems capable of handling this game, especially if you're not a professional competitive player and don't have particularly high hardware demands. However, this is purely for testing purposes, and I absolutely do not recommend using it for gaming. As you know, during our use of a computer, the number of background tasks and processes running will gradually increase. The startup programs on the computer will also grow over time. Unless you are someone who is exceptionally skilled at maintaining your computer's health and can keep it in a state as good as new, it will not achieve the performance shown in the video. When using the Chatreey N150 Mini PC for video editing, the performance is still very smooth. Intel integrated graphics have a unique advantage in video decoding. Even when exporting videos over 800 megabytes, its speed remains respectable. In summary, although this computer is a lower spec version of the T9H, it's clear that Chatreey has still put a lot of effort into it, maintaining a focus on key performance aspects. As an entry-level, lightweight mini PC for office work and multimedia, its performance is quite impressive.